You clicked on a story about the Viking slave who rose to power through a single night. But the truth is sharper than the title. This follows one man named Arn. He slept on the floor beside the livestock. He ate last. He spoke little. No one looked him in the eyes. His owner saw him as labor. His clan saw him as nothing. Then one winter night, a storm hit the coast. The hall shook. The warriors left to save the boats, and Arn stood alone in the longhouse with a choice that changed his life. He made one move that flipped his fate. By dawn, the clan knew his name. By the next night, he no longer slept on the ground. This is the night a Viking slave rose to power. Arn slept near the goats. He worked before sunrise. He spoke only when ordered. Yet on this night, the storm hit the coast so hard, the longhouse shook like loose timber. The warriors rushed to save the boats. The hall split with wind and cold air. Arn stood alone, no orders, no eyes on him, only the chance to act. The clan left him with nothing. But this night gave him something no one expected, a single moment where he chose a path that turned him from slave to someone the clan feared and respected. This is the night his life changed. Before we step into his story, settle your breath. Let your shoulders ease. Pull a blanket close or warm your hands near a soft light. Let the room grow quiet. Take one long breath in and one slow breath out. Tell me where you watch from. I enjoy knowing where these stories travel. If these calm Viking tales bring you peace, you support them with a soft like or a gentle subscribe. Leave a quiet comment if you want more stories about forgotten people of the North. Now let the storm settle in your thoughts. Let the longhouse form around you. Arn waits near the fire. His night begins when you speak. Arn woke before the others, as he always did. The longhouse still held the last warmth from the fire, but the cold crept in through the walls. Frost formed on the beams. The livestock stirred. Arn's thin blanket barely covered his shoulders, so he rose slow and kept his breath quiet. He did not want to wake the goats. They kicked when startled. He stood, stretched his stiff legs, and moved through the hall with soft steps. He knew where every loose board sat. He knew which plank groaned. He knew every spot where the wind slipped in. He learned the hall's shape long before he learned the shape of his own strength. Men still slept on raised beds along the walls. Warriors with broad shoulders. Men with iron on their belts. One turned in his sleep and muttered. Arn lowered his gaze and walked past. He never looked at them longer than a heartbeat. He walked toward the fire pit. Embers glowed under layers of ash. He pushed the ash aside and fed the embers thin slivers of wood. The flame rose slow, soft, enough to warm the air around him. Arn held his hands out. The warmth spread over his fingers. He always woke before the others, because slaves ate only after the how chores were done. He needed extra time. If he fell behind, he lost food. If he lost food, he lost strength. And slaves with no strength rarely saw the next winter. A light sound reached him. The door creaked. A thin shaft of gray morning light slipped into the hall. Runa, the woman who managed the daily work of the household, stepped inside. Her cloak dripped with frost. "You wake early," she said. Arn kept his head low. "The fire needed tending." "You feed the animals next," she said. "Then clear the snow by the door. The storm grows by evening." Arn nodded. He kept his voice steady. He never spoke more than needed. Runa stepped past him and checked the beds. She made sure the warriors still slept. Then she pulled her hood tighter and walked back outside. Arn returned to his chores. He fed the goats small handfuls of dried leaves. He checked their hooves. He brushed frost from their backs. He stepped around the cow at the end of the hall. She huffed warm air at him, annoyed he arrived early, but she let him pass. When he finished, he grabbed a wooden shovel and stepped outside to clear the snow. Cold wind struck him at once. The sky stayed heavy with low clouds. The air carried the weight of a storm that waited for night. Arn dug into the snow with steady motions. He lifted the white piles and tossed them aside. His breath escaped in long clouds. He kept the entrance wide enough for the warriors to pass when they woke. He worked in silence. It always stayed silent for him. Slaves did not join morning talks. Slaves did not share plans. They followed orders. Arn learned long ago not to seek anything more. Minutes passed. His arms warmed. The cold bit less. Then footsteps approached. A warrior named Halvar stepped out of the longhouse. He carried his belt in his hand. He fastened the buckle as he looked at Arn. "You start early," Halvar said. Arn lowered his head. "The snow sits high," Halvar grunted. "The storm brings worse. The sea already throws waves at the rocks." Arn kept digging. Halvar stepped closer. "You know boats?" Arn paused. He lifted his eyes for a moment. Only a moment. "I repair hulls," Arn said. "I learned from my father." Halvar's brow tightened. "Your father? He taught you before you were taken?" Arn nodded once. Halvar stepped back. He looked Arn over as if seeing him for the first time. Then he laughed. "A slave who knows tools. Good. We need another pair of hands when the storm hits." Arn lowered his gaze again. He waited. Halvar walked off toward the shore. Arn shoveled more snow. He forced his thoughts still. But Halvar's words lingered. A slave who knows tools. He hated how Halvar said it, as if Arn's skill meant nothing unless the clan needed it, as if Arn held worth only when the storm demanded it. But Arn did know tools. He knew wood. He knew how boats bent under waves. He knew how storms tore hulls if ropes failed. He knew more than he ever spoke. He worked until the doorway sat clear. Then he walked back inside. The warriors stirred awake. Runa passed bowls of porridge. Arn stepped aside. He waited until the last warrior ate. Only when the bowls sat empty did Runa nod for him to take the scraps. Arn ate slow. His stomach warmed. He set the bowl aside. Then the chieftain entered. Karl stood tall, with frost in his beard and wind on his cloak. His eyes scanned the hall. Men straightened. Conversation stopped. Karl spoke. "The storm breaks strong tonight. We prepare the boats. We tie the roofs. We set extra stakes." He lifted a heavy coil of rope. "Everyone works." He turned to Runa. "Keep the younger ones inside. Keep the livestock tied. Make the hall ready." Runa nodded. Karl looked at Arn for a brief moment. Only a passing look, but Arn felt the weight of it. Karl walked out again. The hall filled with noise as warriors prepared for the storm. They strapped belts. They grabbed cloaks. They checked spear shafts even though no enemy stood near the coast. Arn watched them walk outside. Their boots struck the floor with confidence. Their breath moved the air. Their voices carried strength. Then he followed them out. He moved toward the shoreline where Halvar waited with ropes. Arn carried the wooden hammer he used to fix broken hinges. It felt small next to the iron tools the warriors held. The waves crashed hard already. Salt water sprayed into the air. Boat frames creaked. Men tied ropes to heavy stones. Halvar waved Arn over. "Lift that rope. Tie it to the stake." Arn grabbed it. The rope felt rough in his hands. He pulled it tight. He tied it with practiced ease. Halvar watched him. "You tie well," Halvar said. "Better than some men here." Arn kept his eyes low. "I learned early," Halvar nodded. "We need that tonight." Arn tightened the knots. He checked the boards on the hull. He stepped into the cold water to shove the boat higher on the shore. Warriors watched him with faint smirks. "He works like an ox," one said. "Better than the last slave," another said. Arn felt heat rise in his chest, but he stayed silent. He pushed the hull until it rested on stone. Then he stepped back. Karl approached. His hair whipped in the wind. He looked at the men. He looked at the boats. Then he looked at Arn. "You know boats?" Karl asked. Arn nodded. "I learned from my father." Karl studied him. "You tie cleaner knots than Halvar." Halvar scoffed. "His father must have taught him strict." Karl stepped closer. "Your father? Where?" Arn paused. He rarely spoke of the past. "Near the eastern fjord," Arn said. "Our home built boats for traders." Karl's eyes narrowed. He breathed slow. "The eastern fjord, taken in spring raids 2 years past?" Arn nodded once. Karl said nothing more, but something in his expression shifted. The wind grew colder. Waves slammed harder. Karl lifted his hand. "All boats secured. Return to the hall." Men followed at once. Arn walked behind them. The wind pushed against his back. Snow dust swirled around their boots. The storm grew faster than expected. Clouds rolled in thick layers. The longhouse sat strong against the rising wind. Men rushed inside. Arn stepped through the door last. The hall filled with noise again. Voices, tools, movement. Women tied shutters. Children gathered near the fire. Livestock shifted nervously. The walls creaked under the wind. Karl stood in the center. He spoke in a loud, calm voice. "Tonight the storm tears roofs across the coast. We stay together. No man leaves unless ordered. We guard the hall. We guard the livestock. We guard our people." The wind howled outside. Snow slapped the walls. Arn stepped to the side as the warriors took positions by the door and the back wall. Runa moved past him with blankets. She covered the children. She checked the livestock again. Arn stood near the support beam at the center of the hall. He wrapped his arms around it as the building shuddered. A huge gust hit the roof. The whole hall shook. Men grabbed posts. Women steadied the children. The fire bent sideways. Karl shouted, "Brace the left wall! The wind hit strongest there!" Warriors rushed to the wall. Arn watched them. He watched how the wood bent. He watched how one beam groaned. He stepped toward it. Runa grabbed his arm. "You stay back." Arn lowered his gaze. "The beam cracks." Runa looked at him as if she did not understand. Arn pointed. "There." The beam bowed under the pressure. A thin line spread across the wood. Halvar ran toward it. He pressed his shoulder against the beam. Another gust hit. The beam split wider. Karl shouted, "Shields! Brace it!" Warriors shoved their shields against the beam. The building groaned. Arn stepped forward again. His heart pounded. He heard the wood strain. He heard the nails lift. He knew this sound. He knew when boats bent too far. He knew when wood reached its breaking point. He stepped beside Halvar. Halvar looked at him with surprise. "You?" Arn pressed both hands against the beam. He pushed with all his strength. Another gust hit. The beam cracked further. Runa shouted for the children to move back. Karl shouted for more men. Arn felt the wood shift. He felt the pressure. He felt the moment the beam reached its limit. He shouted, "Shift the weight! Push left, not forward!" Halvar blinked. "What?" Arn pushed again. "Left! The wind hits at an angle!" Karl heard him. Karl shouted, Push left! Follow him! The men followed Arn's direction. The beam slid into place. The crack stopped widening. The wall steadied. The wind screamed again, but the hall held. Carl stared at Arn. Arn stepped back. His breath shook. His arms strained. Carl walked toward him. The hall fell silent. Carl lowered his voice. "You read wood," Arn nodded. "My father taught me." Carl took a slow breath. "Tonight you stand with the men." Arn lifted his eyes for the first time in years. Carl continued. "You help hold this hall through the storm." Arn swallowed. "I do." A final gust hit. The hall shook, but Arn stepped forward without fear. He placed his hands on the beam again. He braced himself. The storm grew. The night deepened. The hall creaked, but Arn stood at the center. For the first time, he did not stand as a slave. He stood as someone the hall needed. The storm thickened as night pressed deeper against the longhouse. Snow hit the roof in heavy waves. Wind pushed against the walls so hard the beams groaned like tired animals. Arn stayed at the center support while warriors shifted around him. Their boots scraped against the floor as they braced for each gust. Carl paced the hall with slow steps. His eyes moved from wall to roof to livestock. He noted every sound, every shift. His jaw stayed tense. Runa moved through the room with blankets for the children. She checked the fire. She checked the ropes tied to the rafters. She stopped near Arn for a moment. "You feel the wood better than anyone here," she said softly. Arn kept his hands on the beam. "It bends too far near the left corner. The next gust strains it again." Runa nodded and stepped away to warn Halvar. Arn lowered his ear to the beam. He listened to the long, low groan inside the wood. He heard the way the fibers strained. He felt the slight tremble near the base. He traced the weakness with his palm. He knew exactly where the next crack would form. He heard footsteps behind him. "Storm hit our coast every winter," Halvar said. "But this one hits harder." Arn kept his eyes down. "The wind turns. It strikes from the sea first, then from the north." Halvar folded his arms. "You speak like a shipbuilder." "My father built boats," Arn said. Halvar rubbed his beard. "Your father taught you well. Good thing he did. We need that tonight." Arn stayed quiet. Another gust slammed the left side. The wall bowed inward. Warriors rushed to steady it. Shields pressed against the shaking planks. A child cried. A woman whispered comfort. Carl turned toward Arn. "Where does it break next?" Arn closed his eyes. He placed his palm against the center beam again. He felt the shift through the floor. He listened to the wind pushing against the outer wall. He tracked the tremble up the beam and across the rafters. He opened his eyes. "The back corner," Arn said. "Near the roof. A joint loosens. It lifts when the wind pulls." Carl moved toward the back. He climbed onto a raised bench and checked the rafters. Snow fell through a small crack. He placed his hand on the joint. It lifted a finger's width with each gust. Carl climbed down. He turned to Arn. "We fix it now," Halvar frowned. "In this wind?" Carl pointed upward. "We lose that joint. We lose the roof." Halvar muttered under his breath, but grabbed a rope. Arn stepped forward without waiting for orders. He picked up a wooden mallet and a thick wedge. He tied the rope around his waist the same way he tied it during hull repairs. Carl watched him for a moment, an expression of surprise and respect mixing in his eyes. Carl nodded. "You climb first." Arn didn't hesitate. He climbed the support beams like he climbed the ribs of a boat. His fingers found grooves in the wood. his feet pressed into cuts left by old repairs. Snow drifted from the ceiling as he neared the loose joint. He reached it. He checked the wood. He pressed his thumb into the gap. The joint lifted again with a long whine. Carl shouted from below, "How bad?" Arn held the joint in place with his shoulder. "Loose, but strong under pressure. Needs reinforcement." Carl called to the men. "Send him the rope." Halvar tossed the rope upward. Arn caught it with one hand while holding the joint with the other. He looped the rope over the rafter. He pulled it tight. He tied the knot the same way he tied cracked hull pieces. The wind hit the roof again. The joint tried to lift, but the rope held it down. Arn wedged the block of wood under the joint. He struck it with the mallet. Once, twice, 3 times. The wedge sank into place. The next gust hit. The joint did not move. Arn released a slow breath. He climbed down with careful steps. He landed on the hall floor and handed the mallet back to Runa. Carl stepped closer. "You saved the roof." Arn lowered his gaze. "I did what the wood needed." Carl looked at him for a long moment. "You know more than I expected." Arn did not answer. The storm's howl grew sharper. Snow slammed the door. The shutters rattled. Carl raised his voice. "Brace the door!" Warriors rushed to it. Arn moved with them. The door shook with each gust. Cold air forced its way through the cracks. Arn pressed his palm to the wood. He felt a strain, a shift. He stepped back. He studied the hinges. Halvar noticed. "What is it?" Arn pointed. "The lower hinge pulls. It splits the nail through the frame." Halvar knelt and checked. "He's right." Carl slammed his fist against the doorframe. "We need a new nail. Now." Runa hurried forward with a small metal spike. She handed it to Arn. "Your hands fix faster than theirs." Arn knelt and pressed the hinge tight. The wood resisted. The nail refused at first. Then Arn used his shoulder for leverage. He pressed harder. The nail drove deeper. Another gust hit. The door buckled inward. Men strained to keep it shut. Arn hammered the nail with the back of a shield. The metal sank into place. The hinge held. Carl shouted, "Good." Arn rose again. Sweat dripped down his temple despite the cold. The hall rattled with another violent shove from the wind. A cup fell from a shelf. A goat bleated. A child cried louder. Carl shouted, "Hold steady! This storm breaks soon!" But Arn knew storms. This one did not break soon. It grew. It gathered. It pushed harder. Arn reached for the beam again. He felt the wood shake. He felt the floor shift under his feet. He pressed his ear to the post. Something outside changed. Not the wind, not the snow. The air pressure dropped. The storm turned. The gusts hit from the east now. Arn's eyes widened. "The wind shifts," Halvar frowned. "So?" Carl understood at once. "The east side has no extra stakes." Runa's face drained of color. "The east wall bends the easiest." Arn ran toward the east wall. He pressed both hands to the planks. The wood bowed inward with the new wind. Cracks formed along the bottom. He shouted, "Brace here, now!" Carl called out, "Move to the east wall." Warriors rushed to the side. They pressed shields against the planks. Their boots slid across the floor. A long groan echoed through the hall. The planks lifted at the bottom. Carl grabbed a spear shaft. He jammed it between the wall and the floor. It steadied the lower beam. Arn saw another weakness. A rope above the east window loosened. It whipped in the wind. He shouted, "Rope loose on the upper frame!" Carl ordered, "Climb again, Arn!" Arn climbed the wall beams without hesitation. Snow blew in through the cracks. Wind bit his hands. He grabbed the rope. He tied it around the rafter and pulled tight, but the knot slipped. The rope frayed. Arn growled under his breath. He looped it again. He wrapped it tighter. He threw the free end down to Halvar. "Pull!" Arn shouted. Halvar pulled with full strength. The rope creaked. The wall bent back into place. Arn hammered a wooden peg into the upper frame with the heel of his palm. The rope locked into place. He climbed down. Another gust hit the roof. The hall rattled, but the east wall held. Carl looked at Arn. His voice dropped. "You know storms better than any man here." Arn wiped snow from his face. "I know wood. I know pressure. I know how it speaks." Carl nodded slowly. "Then tonight, you speak for the hall." Arn froze. Halvar blinked. "Him? Speak for the hall?" Carl raised a hand. "He saved the wall. He saved the roof. He holds the center beam. He leads our hands tonight." The hall fell silent. Runa stared at Arn with wide eyes. Children stopped crying. Warriors shifted, but did not argue. Carl stepped forward. "Tonight you stand as one of us, not as a slave, not as a worker, as a man the hall trusts." Arn's breath caught. He felt warmth rise in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Carl turned to the warriors. "We follow Arn's lead with the wood. He knows the hall better than any of us." Arn swallowed. His hands shook. He forced his voice steady. "The next gust hits the roof at the center," Arn said. "Brace the beams near the ridge." Carl nodded. "Do as he says." Men rushed to the center beams. Arn walked with them. He pointed to the exact joint that lifted with the wind. They pressed their shields and backs against it. Another gust struck. The roof bowed, but did not collapse. Arn listened again. He moved to the next weakness. He guided them. They followed him like they followed Carl. For the first time in his life, Arn did not walk behind the men. He walked in front. He fixed what they held. He braced what they could not see. He steadied the hall each time the storm tried to break it. He climbed the rafters again. He struck pegs into place. He tied knots before the rope snapped. He pressed wood together. Before the beam split, the storm raged on, but Arn stayed ahead of it. Carl stood near him each time. Halvar followed every call. The warriors braced every beam Arn named. Runa watched him with eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Not pity, respect. The hall shook one last time near dawn. Arn pressed his palm to the center beam. It held firm. He pulled his hand back. He breathed slow. Carl stepped forward. "It ends." The storm's howl faded into low wind. Snow drifted from the roof in soft sheets. The hall steadied. The beams relaxed under the lighter pressure. Runa whispered, "The storm passes." Halvar leaned against the wall. "We still stand." Carl looked at Arn. "Because he led us through the night." Arn said nothing. He stood in silence, his arms trembling from the work, his breath still heavy. But inside him, something shifted. The men did not look at him as a slave. The hall did not hold him as one. And the night that tried to break the longhouse gave him something new. A place, a voice, a beginning. The storm weakened through the first hours of dawn, but the longhouse still creaked under the aftershocks of the night. Snow slid from the roof in heavy sheets. Frost clung to the beams. The air inside held the thick, tired breath of people who fought the wind for hours. Arn stood near the center post. His arms still trembled. His legs ached from climbing and bracing the beams. Sweat dried on his back, leaving cold patches under his thin tunic. But he stayed standing. He watched the walls the same way he watched a hull after a long fight with the sea. Carl moved through the hall with slow steps. He checked every beam Arn named during the night. Each one held firm. Each one stayed strong. Carl finally stopped near Arn. You kept this hall from splitting. Arn kept his head low. I knew where the weak places stood. Carl shook his head. You knew more than that. You understood the storm before any of us. Arn stayed quiet. Warriors nearby watched the two of them. They did not laugh as they did before. They did not look at Arn as an object or tool. They looked at him with something new in their eyes, something he did not trust yet, but something that warmed him inside. Respect. Halvar approached them. He rubbed his shoulder where a beam caught him earlier. You saved my life when that crack spread, he said to Arn. If the beam fell, I fall with it. Arn answered without lifting his gaze. The beam spoke loud. Halvar snorted. Then keep listening. We need ears like yours. The wind outside dropped. Snow settled. The early morning light crept through the small gaps in the shutters. Runa walked toward Arn with a wooden cup. Steam rose from it. Drink, she said. Arn hesitated. Runa pressed the cup into his hands. Drink. Arn lifted it and drank slowly. Warm broth slid down his throat. His muscles loosened a little. Runa stepped back. Eat after the men, but drink now. Arn nodded. Carl clapped his hands together. We check the outside. Warriors moved to the door. Carl opened it. A blast of cold air pushed inside. Snow rose in drifting waves, almost as tall as a man's knee. The coastline lay buried under a thick white layer, trees bent with heavy frost. Carl stepped outside. Halvar followed. Several men formed a line behind them. Arn stayed inside until Carl turned around and waved him forward. You come with us, Carl said. Your eyes see what we miss. Arn tightened his grip on the last of the broth and stepped outside. The cold struck him hard. He drew a slow breath to steady his chest. The longhouse roof sagged in places, but did not break. Wooden stakes at the corners held steady. The east wall leaned inward, only slightly where the rope Arn tied kept the frame in place. Carl studied the roof. You climbed there. Arn nodded. Carl traced the rope with his gloved hand. And you fixed it faster than 2 men. Arn stayed quiet. Halvar laughed, though his voice held no mockery. He climbs like a squirrel and thinks like a shipwright. Carl ignored the joke. His eyes stayed on the roof. He climbs like someone who knows when wood lies. The men split into groups. Some cleared pathways. Some checked the boats at the shore. Arn followed Carl toward the back of the hall where the largest snowdrifts gathered. Every step he took left deep marks in the snow. The world felt quiet now, as if it held its breath after the long night. Carl stopped at the woodpile. Snow covered half the logs. Arn brushed the top layer away. His fingers felt the edges of the pile. He listened for creaks. He checked the place where the wind had pushed hardest. Carl crossed his arms. Tell me what you see. Arn took his time. He touched the lowest log. He pressed it. He measured the shift in the pile. He checked the angle where the storm struck it. It holds, Arn said, but the bottom log cracks. It breaks with another strong wind. Carl nodded. We replace it later. Arn turned toward the tree line. The forest stood silent. Snow covered every branch. But something about the woods felt wrong. The storm pushed trees in strange angles. Tracks cut through the snow in odd shapes. Carl followed Arn's gaze. You see something, Arn frowned. The storm pushed the trees toward the hall, but footprints go the other way. Carl stepped closer. Footprints? Arn walked toward the tree line. The snow swallowed most tracks, but not all of them. Small marks, narrow, swift. Someone had moved through the storm. Someone walked toward the hall at some point during the night. Arn crouched down. He touched one of the prints. Halvar approached. "You see tracks?" Arn nodded. "Light steps, not a man." Carl stared at the path. "A child?" Arn shook his head. "Steps too far apart, too quick. Someone trained to run, someone used to snow." Carl's expression hardened. "Raider?" Arn paused. "Not heavy enough, not wide enough. Someone smaller." Carl drew a slow breath. The air steamed around his mouth. "Slave?" Halvar asked under his breath. Arn stood. He stared deeper into the trees. "Someone from another clan. Someone who watched the hall during the storm." Carl's eyes narrowed. "Why watch us during a storm?" Arn felt the air shift. Memories of raids rushed through his thoughts. His father's home. The night he lost everything. He shook the memory away. "They test your strength," Arn said. "They watch if your hall weakens." Carl held Arn's gaze. "They think we break?" Arn nodded. "If the storm tore the roof, they strike after dawn." Halvar spat in the snow. "Cowards!" Carl turned sharply. "Watch your tongue. If someone stalks our hall, they do not strike alone." Arn straightened. He breathed slow. "The hall stands strong. They know that now." Carl rubbed his chin. "And now they rethink their plan." Arn stepped toward the trees again. He pressed his boot beside the faint tracks. The prints went deeper into the woods. Carl stopped him. "Not now. We watch the hall first." Arn obeyed. They finished checking the outside. The longhouse held far better than any other home in the village. Arn's work saved parts of it from splitting. His knots kept the roof tight. His wedge held the rafter in place. Carl walked back inside. Men followed. Arn brushed snow from his cloak before entering. The hall felt warmer now. Children laughed quietly again. Women stirred broth. The livestock calmed. Runa met Arn at the doorway. "You helped save all of them," she said. Arn looked down. "The hall held because the men pushed." Runa shook her head. "The men pushed where you told them." Arn said nothing. Carl stood near the fire. "Come here, Arn." Arn approached with careful steps. Carl faced him. "You know storms. You know wood. You know the ground. You lead us through the night with a calm mind. That earns a place." Arn's breath tightened. "A place?" Carl nodded. "You sleep with the men tonight, not near the livestock." Arn froze. Runa covered her mouth with her hand. Halvar raised his eyebrows. Men around the hall murmured. Carl raised his voice. "He earned it. He proved it. He held the hall when it split." Arn stared at the floor. No slave rose this fast. No slave stepped into a man's place after one night. But Arn felt something he never felt before. Belonging. Carl continued. "At dusk, we speak before the council. They decide his standing." Halvar smirked. "One night and he rises faster than men born here." Runa stepped forward. "He saved lives." Halvar shrugged. "I did not deny it." Arn swallowed. His voice came low. "I serve the hall." Carl clapped him on the shoulder. "You do more than that. You stand for it." Arn stepped aside and breathed slow. The hall returned to work. The children laughed again. The fire grew stronger as Runa fed it new wood. Arn moved to the side of the hall where he slept with the goats the night before. He knelt down. He rolled his thin blanket. The goat nudged him. Confused, he moved. Arn whispered, "I moved tonight." For the first time in years, he let himself close his eyes for more than a moment. He took a full breath. His chest loosened. But he felt something else too. The tracks in the snow. The watcher in the storm. Someone saw what he did last night. Someone knew the hall now depended on him. Someone knew his worth changed. And people who knew a man's new worth often wanted to test it. Arn slept only a short time before Runa shook his shoulder. Her whisper stayed low, so the warriors on the raised beds did not wake. "Arn, Karl asks for you." Arn opened his eyes. His muscles still ached from the storm. He rose slow and followed her to the center of the hall. Karl waited near the fire. The glow lit half his face. Shadows moved across his beard. Karl spoke soft. "The tracks trouble me," Arn nodded. "Someone watched us." Karl stared into the fire. A storm that strong should keep all clans inside. Yet someone moved through it with intent. Arn crouched beside him. "They knew the storm hides footsteps. They used it." Karl tapped his fingers on his knee. "And they wanted to see if we weakened." Arn studied Karl's eyes. "Something else sits in your thoughts." Karl nodded once. 3 winters passed. A small clan near the eastern fjord tried to raid our stores after a storm. They tested walls first. They sent someone quick, small, silent. They waited for dawn. Arn stayed still. Karl continued. "We drove them off, but they watch us every winter. They never struck full. They only watched." Arn lowered his voice. "Until the storm breaks a hall." Karl nodded again. Arn's mind tightened. His clan once lived near those fjords. He remembered footsteps like that, silent, swift, watching. He remembered warnings from his father. Some clans seek weak halls. They listen for breaks. Arn breathed slow. "You think they return?" Karl looked at him. "I think they watched your work last night, and now they reconsider." Arn met Karl's eyes. "If they strike quiet." Karl stood. "Then we prepare before night." He called Halvar and 2 more warriors. They gathered near the fire. Karl looked at Arn. "You walk with us. You guide us through the woods. You know tracks better than me." Halvar frowned. "He tracks too?" Karl growled. "He grew near the eastern fjord. He knows their signs." Halvar said nothing more. Karl grabbed his cloak. Warriors followed. Arn wrapped his thin cloak around his shoulders and stepped outside into the cold. Snow fell soft now. The sky held a dim gray light that filtered through the trees. The storm passed, but the air still felt heavy with its memory. Karl pointed toward the woods. "Show us." Arn walked ahead. He studied the ground with steady eyes. The faint marks remained, soft, narrow, someone light on their feet, someone who knew how to mask their steps. He followed the trail deeper. The forest closed around them, branches bent with heavy frost. Snow dropped from above with sudden thumps. Karl whispered. "They came close to the hall, closer than I like." Arn crouched again. He brushed snow aside. Small prints, 2 sets, one older than the other. Arn spoke low. "2 people walked here. One followed the other." Halvar lowered his voice. "2 scouts?" Arn shook his head. "The first prints press deep. The second do not. The second walker moved quicker." Karl narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" Arn stood. The second watcher kept distance. They followed the first to make sure they did not fall to the storm. Karl stared at Arn. "You speak of them as if you knew them." Arn lowered his gaze. "My home saw scouts like this, before we fell." No one spoke. Karl finally said, "Then we treat this as threat." Arn followed the trail farther. It led into the trees, then across a frozen stream, then up a small rise. At the top, a tree split in 2 from an old storm. Snow piled around its base. Arn touched the bark. He froze. Halvar stepped closer. "What is it?" Arn pointed. "They stood here, both of them. They watched the hall from this height." Karl stepped beside him. "So they saw the roof hold. They saw the walls stand." Arn nodded. Carl looked around. Look for signs. Halvar checked the tree bark. He found a mark, a small cut in the shape of a thin line. Carl traced it with his thumb. A scout mark, a signal to others. Arn breathed slow. Meaning the hall still stands, Carl grunted. Or meaning attack later. Arn studied the ground. Their prints leave the same way they came, no sign of more. Carl nodded. Then this is still only watch. Halvar clenched his jaw. We strike their trail now. Carl shook his head. If we go deep, we walk into their forest. They know it better. Arn stood. We tighten our walls, strengthen the roof, guard the hall. Carl looked Arn over. You built our defense last night. You tell me where we strengthen next. Arn took a breath. I know. They returned to the hall. Inside, Runa had prepared a meal. The smell filled the large space. Children gathered near the fire. Women mended clothes. Men sharpened tools. Carl raised his voice. Everyone listen. The hall quieted. Carl continued. Another clan watched our hall during the storm. Gasps moved through the room. Runa stepped forward. They approach during storms? Carl nodded. They test strength before they strike. Fear spread across faces. Some women held children close. Older men clenched their jaws. Carl pointed toward Arn. He found the tracks. He followed them. He read their marks. All eyes turned toward Arn. Carl continued. We strengthen the hall again. We brace the back walls. We set stakes around the north side. Arn leads the work. Arn felt dozens of eyes on him. For years he learned to avoid every gaze. Now he stood before all of them. He lifted his chin slightly. We start with the weak joints near the back, Carl nodded. Men, follow him. Arn walked toward the rear of the hall. Warriors gathered behind him. He pointed at the beams loosened by the storm. He directed them where to brace, where to tie thicker rope, where to add wedges. Halvar hammered stakes into place. Arn checked each one. Runa stood by the children. She watched Arn with quiet pride. By midday, the hall strengthened enough to hold against another storm and any silent push from scouts. Carl walked toward Arn. You read the hall better than any builder. Arn shook his head. I read the wood. Wood does not lie. Carl looked out the window slit. Snow fell slow outside. They think we break. They test us. But tonight we show strength. Arn breathed slow. Tonight? Carl nodded. We sit awake. We guard the hall. If they return, we greet them. Halvar cracked his knuckles. Let them try. But Arn stayed quiet. His father once said the same words before a raid broke their hall. Arn remembered the flames, the shouting, the loss. He would not let it repeat. He walked to the center beam again. He pressed his ear against it. He listened for any hidden crack left by the storm. He checked the ropes tied near the rafters. Runa approached. You hear something? Arn lifted his head. The hall breathed strong. Runa smiled. Because you shaped it last night. Arn stepped back. He looked around. The hall now felt different, not because of the repairs, but because he stood in the work, not as a slave, but as a builder, as a protector. Carl's voice cut through the hall. Eat now, guard after. Everyone settled. Arn waited until the men ate. Runa brought him a bowl of stew. She pressed it into his hands without waiting for permission. You eat with strength now, she said. Arn took a seat near the fire. He ate slow, letting the heat fill him. Carl sat near him. You sleep little. Arn nodded. Storm kept me awake. Carl studied him. Fear? Arn lifted his eyes. Wood speaks loud. I listen, Carl smirked. Not fear then. Arn said nothing. Halvar sat across the fire. When they come, will they come with more than two? Arn nodded. They always send watchers first. They measure. Then they strike with quiet feet and sharp blades. Halvor grinned. Good. I tire of storms. A fight warms the blood. Arn's jaw tightened. Do not meet them outside. They lure men from the hall. They wait in shadows. Karl raised a brow. You know their way. Arn stared into the fire. They took everything from me. The hall grew silent. Karl lowered his voice. Then you know their weakness. Arn nodded. They fight when halls break. They fear strong walls. They fear men who stand united. They fear lights that do not dim. Karl leaned back. Then we give them fear. Arn breathed slow. Yes. When night came, the hall filled with soft torchlight. Men stood near the door. Women stayed near the center. The children slept close together under blankets. Arn stood beside Karl. The wind outside dropped to almost nothing. Snow fell in slow flakes. Too quiet. Karl whispered, They wait for silence. Arn nodded. They come soon. They watched. Minutes passed. Then Arn heard it. A faint crunch in the snow. Soft. Careful. Then another. Light steps. 2 sets. The same as before. Arn whispered, They return. Karl signaled the men. Warriors lifted shields. Halvor moved toward the door. The crunch grew closer. The snow shifted under careful feet. Arn breathed deep. He stepped forward. He pressed his palm to the door. He felt the air outside shift. Not wind, movement. They stood at the threshold. Arn whispered, Now. Karl lifted his hand. The door swung open. Cold air blasted inside. 2 figures stood at the edge of the torchlight. Small, cloaked, silent. They did not run. They stared at Arn. He stared back. He knew their stance. He knew the way they held their weight. He knew the way they breathed. They came from the fjord clans. One lifted her hood. A girl, no older than 14, eyes sharp as winter glass, breath steady, no fear in her face. The second lifted his hood. A boy, younger, maybe 10, Runa gasped. Halvor cursed under his breath. Karl lifted his spear but did not strike. The girl stared at Arn. Her voice came steady. We watched your hall. We watched your strength. Now we bring truth. Arn stepped forward. What truth? The girl met his eyes without blinking. They do not test you anymore. Arn's heart tightened. They come tonight. The girl stepped deeper into the longhouse light. Snow clung to her cloak. Her breath rose in white clouds. The boy behind her stayed close, his eyes darting around the hall as if he weighed every exit. Karl moved his spear slightly, not in threat, but in warning. Warriors behind him tightened their grips. Women pulled the children to the back. Runa grabbed a torch and raised it higher. Arn stood still. The girl's gaze stayed on him, as if she came for him alone. Karl spoke first. Who are you? The girl answered without fear. From the fjord clans. Halvor cursed. We should have known. The girl ignored him. We watched your hall during the storm. We thought it would break. She nodded toward Arn. It did not break because of him. Arn felt the hall's silence lock around him. Karl stepped closer. You say they come tonight. How many? The girl turned slightly so the boy at her side spoke. His voice shook at the edges, but he stood tall. 20, maybe more. They move now. Runa whispered. 20? Halvor clenched his fists. Closer than I thought. Karl's eyes narrowed. Why warn us? The girl breathed slow. She chose her words. We ran from them. They sent us to watch, to mark where your hall bends. We saw it stand. We learned they lied. Karl's stare hardened. Lied? They said you weaken every winter. she said. They said your men break. They said your haul falls easy. Her jaw tightened. We saw something else. We saw work stronger than theirs. Her eyes locked on Arn again. You shaped the beams. You set the knots. You braced the haul. You lead men who trust you. Arn felt something cold and strange inside him. Not fear, not pride, recognition. These two spoke the same way Scout spoke the night his home fell. Carl lowered his spear. Why warn us if you come from their clan? The girl's breath shook for the first time. Because they killed my father last winter, she pointed to the boy. They killed his mother. They raid their own when they hunger. She swallowed. We do not serve them now. Carl studied the two young scouts. Snow dusted their hair. Their clothes hung torn at the edges. Their boots looked worn to the last stitch, fleeing, not spying. Carl spoke. If we take you in, we stand against your clan. The girl lifted her chin. They come for you either way. Arn stepped forward. They will strike from shadows, near the trees, near the path along the stream. The girl looked at him with surprise. Yes, they wait there. Carl turned to Arn. You know the stream path? Arn nodded. My father walked it. He taught me the places where raiders hide. Carl took a deep breath. Then we prepare. Arn turned to the girl. How long until they reach the stream? She closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to something far away. Not long. They push hard. They want surprise. Arn nodded once. They do not get it. Carl raised his voice. Men, to arms! The hall surged into motion. Shields lifted. Spears gathered. Women moved the children farther back. Runa guided the two scouts toward the fire. Carl grabbed Arn's shoulder. You guide us. Arn looked him straight in the eye. You trust me to lead warriors? Carl answered without hesitation. You led us already. Halvar approached with a shield. He thrust it toward Arn. Take it. You earned it. Arn stared at the shield in his hands. Heavy, solid, a warrior's shield. He ran his fingers along the rim. A man without standing never touched one openly. Arn lifted it onto his arm. It fit. Carl pointed toward the back door. We defend from the outside first. We catch them before they reach the hall. Arn shook his head. No. Carl blinked. No? Arn turned toward the hall's center beam. We defend from inside. They want an easy haul. They strike when men leave. If we leave, they break the roof. They burn the wall. They drag families out. He pointed to the door. They want you outside, in the snow, in the dark. Carl considered this. Halvar watched Arn with cautious respect. Arn continued, his voice low but steady. We lock the hall. We strengthen the door. We brace the back. We hold the entryway. Only one man fits at a time. Their numbers mean nothing. Carl's breath eased. A choke point. Arn nodded. Yes, Halvar smirked. A good plan, from a good mind. Carl turned to the warriors. We hold the hall. Men spread out. Arn guided them. Place the shields here, Arn said. Stack wood against the left door frame. Brace the hinges with a spear shaft. Carl shouted orders as Arn moved. Warriors followed every instruction without question. Arn checked the roof one last time. He tightened the ropes. He pressed wedges deeper. He listened to the wood breathe. The hall no longer felt fragile. It felt ready. Runa approached with a knife in hand. She handed it to Arn. He accepted it. Thank you, she touched his arm. Do not fall. Arn met her eyes. I will not. A thud echoed from outside. Everyone froze. Another thud. Closer. Snow shifting under fast feet. Carl lifted his spear. They reached the hall. Arn stepped beside him, shield in hand, knife ready. A whisper slipped through the wood from outside. Light footsteps, soft commands, the faint scrape of metal. Arn breathed slow. They circle. Halvar pressed against the wall. Waiting for the weak point. Arn shook his head. They find none. The door handle moved. Carl stepped forward. Hold! The handle rattled again. A sharp hit struck the wood. Then another. They tried to break it with a battering strike. Arn braced his shield against the door. Halvar pressed beside him. 2 more men joined. Carl shouted, "Steady!" A heavy blow hit the door. The wood shook. The hinges creaked. But Arn's nail held. Another strike. Arn pressed harder. His feet dug into the floor. His shoulder held the shield firm. Another hit. The door groaned. A low voice outside barked an order. Footsteps shifted. More bodies pressed to the door. Carl growled. They try to push through. Arn's muscles strained. They fail. The next strike came harder. The door split, but only at the top. A small crack. Snow pushed in through it. A hand reached through the crack with a blade. Arn reacted fast. He slammed his shield upward. The blade withdrew with a sharp cry from outside. Carl's eyes burned with pride. Good! Another strike. Another push. Arn felt the door give slightly under pressure. His legs shook from the effort. Sweat rolled down his back. Halvar grunted. They push stronger now. Arn growled under his breath. Let them push. He stepped back half a step. Halvar looked confused. What are you? Arn slammed forward again with all his weight. The door slammed outward by a finger's width. Outside, men stumbled, losing balance. Carl saw it. Again! Arn stepped back. He slammed his shield forward again. The door burst open by a foot. 3 raiders fell into the hall, unbalanced from the sudden push. Carl roared, "Take them!" Halvar struck the first with a spear butt. A warrior slammed a shield into the second. Arn stepped forward and drove his knee into the third. The raider hit the floor hard. Carl finished the job with 1 clean strike of the spear shaft. The raiders lay on the floor, groaning, dazed, unable to rise. The hall roared with shouts of strength. Arn stepped back. He raised his shield. Brace again! Warriors pushed the door shut. They wedged the spear back into the hinges. Outside, raiders shouted in confusion. They expected a weak hall. They expected men who panicked. They expected fear. Instead, they met a man they did not know. A man who fought storms. A man who shaped wood. A man who stood as a wall. Arn listened. He pressed his ear to the wood. He heard their steps retreat. Their voices lowered. Their plans shifted. They fear now, Arn whispered. Carl nodded. Then we finish this. Outside, the raiders regrouped. Inside, Arn's eyes sharpened. He knew the next strike came soon, and he would meet it. The hall waited in silence after the raiders pulled back. Torchlight trembled along the walls. Steam rose from the warrior's breath. Children huddled under blankets. Women held wooden stakes ready in shaking hands. Runa stood near the fire with the 2 fjord scouts at her sides. Both watched the door with wide, steady eyes. Carl whispered, "They regroup." Arn nodded. "They strike again, harder." Halvar wiped blood from his knuckles. "Let them try." Arn pointed to the back wall. 2 men there. They test both sides. Carl nodded. "Halvar, take 2." Halvar rushed across the hall with 2 warriors. They pressed their backs against the wall and waited. Arn pressed his palm to the door again. The wood carried movement, light steps, quick breaths, a low hum of voices that rose then fell. They argued. They planned. Arn lowered his voice. "They fight with fear now. They expected weak wood. They met strong beams." Carl smiled grimly. "Good. A sound cut through the quiet, soft, subtle. Snow shifting near the back window. Arn turned fast. There! Halvar lunged toward the window. A hand reached through the gap, trying to lift the frame. Halvar slammed his shield against it. The hand vanished. Carl shouted, "Brace the window!" Warriors shoved crates beneath the frame. They nailed a board across it. Snow drifted in through small cracks, but no one entered. Arn breathed slow. They divide their strikes. They want distraction. Carl looked at him. What comes next? Arn stepped into the center of the hall. He listened. He closed his eyes. He heard wind. He heard snow. And beneath it, soft pulses of pressure on the ground, footsteps forming a half circle. They surround the hall, Arn said, but they fear the door. They fear the window. Carl's jaw tightened. Where do they strike then? Arn walked toward the livestock stall. He pressed his palm to the floor. The wood creaked under pressure from below. His eyes widened. They dig, Carl swore. Dig through frozen ground? Arn shook his head. They dig through snow. They clear a space under the hall. They find weak boards. They break through from below, Halvar spat. Rats! Arn stood quickly. We move the animals, now. Women hurried forward. They guided the goats and cow toward the front corner. Children stepped back. Arn and two warriors lifted the troughs aside. A faint sound echoed under the floor. Scraping, slow, patient. Carl raised his spear. How many? Arn lowered his ear to the boards again. 3, maybe 4. They dig under the churned snow. Halvar lifted his axe. We wait, and then we crush them. Arn shook his head. No, they expect panic. They expect us to guard from above. They expect us to press down. Carl nodded. So what do we do? Arn stood. His voice came steady. We go to them. Carl's brow lowered. Under the hall? Arn nodded once. We surprise them. They expect hall defenders. They do not expect someone in the snow, in the dark. Behind them. Carl turned to the warriors. 5 men with me. Arn raised his hand. I lead. Carl hesitated just long enough to show he cared whether Arn lived. Then he nodded. You lead. They moved fast. Runa rushed forward. You go into the cold with raiders waiting. Arn met her eyes. They enter the hall if we do nothing. She swallowed. Then come back. Arn nodded. Carl signaled the men. They slipped out the back door into the cold night. Snowflakes drifted from a sky with no wind. The world sat too quiet, too still, the kind of stillness that hid danger beneath its surface. Arn moved first. The snow rose to his shins. He moved without sound. He guided the men along the wall's edge. They crouched low. Arn reached the far corner. He pressed his hand into the snow. Warm air. They dug through. Someone had carved a low path under the hall's edge. The raider's breath warmed the packed snow. A narrow tunnel formed. Voices echoed softly from inside the tunnel. Short, urgent. Arn breathed slow. There, Carl pointed. We strike fast, quiet. Arn crawled into the tunnel first. Snow scraped against his back. The cold soaked into his hands. But he moved forward with slow, deliberate breaths. His father once taught him to move like this when checking boat hulls near frozen shores. His father's voice filled his mind. Move with the wood, feel the ground, let it speak. Arn reached the end of the tunnel. 3 raiders crouched under the hall floor. One held a knife between his teeth. The others pried at a weak board with sharpened sticks. They whispered to each other. Arn did not hesitate. He lunged. His shield struck the first raider's back. The man collapsed with a grunt. The second raider spun, swinging a blade. Arn ducked and slammed his shoulder into the man's chest. The blade flew from his hand. Karl crawled behind Arn. Halvar burst into the space. The third raider tried to run, but Halvar grabbed him by the furs and pulled him out of the tunnel. The fight stayed quick, quiet, brutal. When the last raider fell limp, Karl grabbed Arn's arm. "Good strike," Arn nodded. His breath steamed in the cold. Snow melted on his skin. Karl looked toward the trees. "The others hear nothing. They still gather." Arn crawled out into the open. He scanned the dark tree line. Shadows moved, figures shifted behind branches. "They wait for a signal," Arn said. Karl grinned. "Then we give none." Arn crouched low. "We fight inside again." They ran back to the hall, leaving the fallen raiders buried under the snow. Inside, the two scouts rushed forward the moment Arn entered. The girl kept her voice low. "Did they break through?" Arn shook his head. "No, they fail." Karl lifted his spear. "Now they strike with full push." A horn sounded outside, not loud, low, warning. Halvar lifted his shield. "They come." Arn stepped into place by the center beam. Karl took his position by the door. Warriors spread along the walls. The first hit struck the door like a crashing wave. Arn braced. Karl shouted, "Hold!" Another hit, harder. The door shuddered. Snow fell from the rafters. The hinges rattled, but Arn's repairs held. Another strike, another. Voices outside roared. Raiders pushed in unison. The hall groaned. Runa pulled the children close. Women pressed stakes forward. Arn pushed with all his strength. His back burned. His arms shook. He did not move. Karl shouted over the roar. "Arn, how long?" Arn steadied his breath. "Until they tire." Halvar laughed. "Good answer." The strikes weakened. The roars faded. The pressure loosened. The raiders retreated. Karl listened. "They prepare a last push," Arn nodded. "One more, strongest." Karl lowered his spear. "Then we end it." The raiders shouted again. Snow shifted. Feet pounded. Arn tightened his grip on the shield. His heart pounded, but his breath stayed steady. The final hit slammed into the door. The hall shook. Arn pushed forward with every muscle in his body. Karl pressed beside him. Halvar roared with effort. The door bent. The hinge cracked. A raider's blade pierced a crack in the wood. Arn slammed his shield against it. The blade snapped. A cry echoed outside. Karl roared, "Push!" Arn stepped back one step. He gathered his strength. He lunged forward. The shield struck the door with such force it buckled outward. The raiders fell back again, stumbling over each other. Karl burst through the open door. Arn followed. Halvar and the warriors surged behind them. The raiders scattered. They did not expect the hall to push out. They did not expect strength instead of fear. Karl struck the first with a swing of his spear. Halvar knocked another into the snow. Warriors crashed into the raider line like a wave of shields. Arn found himself face to face with the raiders' leader, a tall man with dark fur and ice in his beard. The man raised an axe. Arn raised his shield. The axe slammed down. Arn pushed upward. The blade slid off. The leader struck again. Arn stepped inside, grabbed the man's wrist, and drove his knife into the raider's shoulder. The man fell. Chaos filled the snow. Shouts, scraping metal, falling bodies, then silence. Karl stood in the center of the field. Halvar leaned on his shield, breath heavy. Runa rushed outside with the scouts behind her. Arn breathed slow. His arms ached. His knees trembled. Karl turned to Arn. "You saved the hall," Halvar nodded. "And all of us." Runa touched Arn's arm. "You brought them home alive." The Fjord girl stepped forward. "Your strength broke theirs." Arn looked around. The hall stood. The family stood. The clan stood. Carl lifted his voice. Let it be known, Arn is free. Gasps filled the air. Carl continued. He rises as one of us. He holds standing. He holds respect. He holds place. Halvar lifted his shield. A man of the hall! Voices echoed through the snow. Arn stood still. The night felt wide, open, new. He closed his eyes and breathed. A full breath, a free breath. His father would have wanted this. His new hall needed this. And this night, Arn claimed his place among them. You stayed until the last moment of Arn's rise. You walked beside him through storms, threats, fear, and strength. You watched him fight for a hall that shaped him into the man he waited years to become. Before you go, breathe slow. Let your shoulders drop. Let your mind settle. Let the quiet of the longhouse stay with you. Tell me where you watched from. I enjoy knowing where these stories travel. If you want more Viking tales like this, feel welcome to subscribe, leave a soft comment, or press like. It supports these long nights of storytelling. Next time, I tell you about the shieldless warrior who held a bridge alone. There is a freebie waiting for you in the description. Sleep warm, rest well, until the next story.